The piercing shriek of a siren sliced through the thick night air, its red and blue strobe lights painting grotesque patterns on the rain-slicked asphalt. Detective Harding, his trench coat pulled tight, pushed past the gawkers and approached the scene. His eyes, hardened by years of witnessing humanity's darkest corners, scanned the area. Harding stepped across the threshold, the flickering shadows painting grotesque images on his face. A wave of nausea hit him, the metallic stench of blood thick in the air. The warehouse, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, pulsed with an eerie silence. As Harding's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw it, the source of the dripping, the epicenter of the nightmare, and in that moment he knew the reality was far worse than he had imagined. In the center of the warehouse floor, sprawled beneath the flickering light, lay a figure, or rather what was left of a figure. The body was a grotesque parody of the human form. Harding knelt beside the body, his gaze clinical, detached. The victim, a young man, his face contorted in a silent scream, was still alive. "Get me the coroner," Harding barked, "and find me whoever did this, now!" Harding remained, his gaze fixed on the still living corpse. This was something ancient, something primal, and in the depths of those shadows something stirred. The days that followed were a blur of interrogations, dead ends, and mounting pressure from a public hungry for answers. Harding, driven by his own demons and the haunting image of the victim's pleading eyes, pushed himself and his team relentlessly. He scoured the city, chasing shadows and whispers, each lead turning to dust in his hands. The killer, a phantom, a wraith, seemed to melt back into the darkness after each gruesome act, leaving behind nothing but a trail of blood and terror. The newspapers, eager to capitalize on the city's fear, dubbed the killer the Skin Collector, a moniker that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened criminals. The city held its breath, living in the suffocating grip of terror, waiting for the next body to be found, the next victim to be claimed by the darkness. Harding, poring over crime scene photos, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, knew that time was running out. He could feel it in his gut. This wasn't just about the thrill of the kill. There was something more at play here, something twisted and depraved that defied logic and reason. The way the skin was removed with such precision, such care, it spoke of a chilling intimacy, a macabre ritual. He could almost hear the killer's thoughts, feel the cold, calculating intelligence behind the madness. One night, while going through the evidence for the 100th time, a small detail, easily overlooked, snagged his attention. A single strand of hair, clinging stubbornly to the victim's flayed skin. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. This wasn't just about catching a killer anymore, this was personal. The DNA results came back with a match. The hair belonged to a man named Elias Croft, a former mortician with a history of mental instability and a disturbing fascination with the human anatomy. Harding, his gut clenching with a mixture of dread and anticipation, pulled up Croft's file, his eyes scanning the grainy mugshot. The face that stared back at him was nondescript, almost forgettable, yet there was something in the eyes, a flicker of something cold and calculating that sent a shiver down his spine. Harding slammed the file shut, a sense of urgency gripping him. He had his man, but something felt off. The killings, they were escalating, becoming more frequent, more brazen. It was as if Croft was taunting him, daring him to catch him. And then it hit him. This wasn't about trophies or even the thrill of the kill. Croft wasn't collecting skin, he was wearing it. The realization hit Harding like a physical blow, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with sickening clarity. Croft's obsession with the human form, his knowledge of anatomy, the precision of the flayings, it all pointed to a single horrifying conclusion. He was using the skin of his victims to replace his own decaying flesh, to stitch together a macabre tapestry of stolen lives. Harding could almost see him, could almost smell the stench of decay and formaldehyde that clung to him like a shroud. He could hear the whispers of the dead, their voices echoing through Croft's madness, urging him on. This wasn't just a killer he was hunting anymore. This was a monster. And Harding, the hunter, had become the hunted. Rain lashed against the window panes of Detective Harding's apartment, mirroring the turmoil within. The muted glow of a solitary lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the cluttered room. Stacks of dusty case files teetered precariously on every surface. Harding's gaze fixed on the black and white mugshot of Elias Croft. The man's eyes seemed to bore into his very soul. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes and bitter coffee. Each drag he took from his cigarette was a slow burn. "Wearing the skin," he muttered. The sheer depravity of Croft's actions sent a chill down his spine. He had seen his fair share of darkness, but this was different. This gnawed at the edges of sanity. Harding closed his eyes, willing himself to focus. He had to think like Croft, but the more he delved into the killer's psyche, the more he felt unease. It was like staring into an abyss. Memories, unwelcome guests from a past he'd rather forget, flickered at the edges of his consciousness. Images of another case, another killer, another time he had looked into the abyss and barely escaped its pull. The case that had driven him into this self-imposed exile, seeking solace in the shadows. He remembered the victim, a young woman, her life brutally cut short. The relentless pursuit, the sleepless nights, the gnawing obsession, and the crushing weight of failure, the bitter taste of defeat. Harding shook his head, trying to dislodge the memories, but the past had a way of resurfacing, demanding to be seen. He could outrun his demons, but he couldn't hide from them forever. The relentless drumming of the rain against the window pane echoed his dread. He reached for another cigarette, the flickering flame casting shadows on the walls. He was back in the game, whether he liked it or not. He was no longer just a detective chasing shadows. He was a man wrestling with his own demons. And as he stared at Croft's image, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time the stakes were higher than ever before. A sharp knock on the door jolted Harding back to the present. He rose slowly from his chair, his joints aching in protest after hours spent hunched over his desk. As he made his way to the door, a wave of dizziness washed over him, a testament to his lack of sleep and the steady diet of cigarettes and coffee that had become his only sustenance. He peered through the peephole, his heart sinking as he recognized the figure standing in the dimly lit hallway. It was Sergeant Miller, his former partner, his face etched with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Harding hesitated for a moment, torn between the urge to retreat back into the shadows and the knowledge that he couldn't outrun his past forever. "Harding," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. "Can I come in?" Harding sighed, knowing that there was no point in pretending he wasn't home. He opened the door, stepping aside to let Miller enter. The sergeant's gaze swept over the cluttered apartment, his eyes lingering on the stacks of files and the overflowing ashtrays, a silent indictment of Harding's self-imposed exile. "You look like hell, Harding," Miller said, his voice gruff with concern. "Life of a retired detective," Harding replied, his voice flat, devoid of humor. He gestured towards the worn-out armchair in the corner of the room. "Have a seat. I'll get you a drink." Miller settled into the armchair, his gaze never leaving Harding as he moved about the cramped apartment, pouring them both a generous measure of whiskey. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken words, with shared memories and the weight of their past. "They pulled me back in," Harding, Miller finally said, his voice heavy with resignation. The skin collector, it's bad. Worse than anything I've ever seen. Harding nodded, taking a long sip of his whiskey, the burning liquid doing little to dull the ache in his bones or the knot of dread twisting in his gut. He had seen the reports, had heard the whispers on the street. The city was on edge, gripped by a fear that ran deeper than anything he had witnessed before. "They think you can help," Miller continued, his gaze fixed on the mugshot of Elias Croft lying on the desk. "They think you're the only one who can stop him," Harding scoffed, shaking his head. "Stop him? They haven't even caught him yet. And even if they do, this isn't just about catching a killer, Miller. This is different." He hesitated, unsure how to articulate the chilling realization that had taken root in his mind. How could he explain the depths of Croft's madness, the macabre tapestry of stolen lives that the killer was stitching together? How could he convey the sense of dread, the feeling that they were dealing with something ancient, something evil, something that defied logic and reason? "The city's counting on you, Harding," Miller said, his voice soft, pleading. "You're the best we've got. You always were." Harding stared into his glass, the amber liquid swirling before his eyes, mirroring the turmoil raging within him. He had sworn he would never go back, that he would never again subject himself to the darkness that lurked in the shadows of the human soul. But as he listened to the urgency in Miller's voice, as he thought about the fear that gripped the city, he felt a familiar pull, a sense of duty that transcended his own personal demons. He knew he couldn't stay on the sidelines, not while innocent lives were at stake. He had to confront Croft, had to face the darkness head-on, even if it meant dredging up his own demons in the process. He owed it to the victims, to the city, and to himself. "All right, Miller," Harding said, his voice firm, the weight of his decision settling upon him like a shroud. "Tell me everything." The flickering gaslight cast long, grotesque shadows across the cobblestone alleyway, illuminating a scene that sent shivers down even the most hardened officer's spine. Rain mingled with blood, painting the grimy brick walls a sickening shade of crimson. Harding knelt beside the body, his face a mask of grim determination. The victim, a young woman with fiery red hair, lay in a pool of her own blood. It was the absence of skin, flayed with precision, that turned Harding's blood to ice. "Jesus, Harding," Miller muttered, "it's like the bastard wanted to wear her." Harding knew Miller's words were closer to the truth than they dared to imagine. The following days were a blur of dead ends and false leads, each clue leading them further into the labyrinthine heart of the city's underbelly. Harding, driven by a mixture of duty and a growing sense of dread, pushed himself and his team relentlessly, following the trail of whispers and shadows that seemed to cling to Croft like a shroud. They questioned informants, their words dripping with fear and veiled threats, each one painting a picture of a man slowly unraveling, his grip on sanity slipping with each passing day. They visited morgues, the air thick with the cloying scent of formaldehyde and the unspoken lament of the dead, searching for any connection, any clue that might lead them to Croft's macabre lair. But Croft, like a phantom, seemed to melt back into the shadows, always one step ahead, leaving behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions that gnawed at Harding's sanity. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of life and laughter, had become a haunted place, its streets echoing with the unspoken fear that clung to the fog-laden air. "He's toying with us, Harding," Miller said one night, his voice heavy with frustration as they stood over another meticulously flayed corpse, the victim's lifeless eyes staring accusingly at the unforgiving sky. "He knows we're coming. He wants us to find him." Harding, his face etched with exhaustion and a growing sense of unease, nodded grimly. He knew Miller was right. Croft was playing a game, a twisted game of cat and mouse where the stakes were life and death. And as the body count rose, Harding couldn't shake the feeling that they were the ones playing by the killer's rules. The breakthrough was as unexpected as it was horrifying. A tip led them to an abandoned butcher shop in the city's meatpacking district. The air hung heavy with decay and blood. Inside, they found a sight that defied description. The walls were a canvas of flesh and bone. Flayed bodies hung from meat hooks. The silence was broken only by dripping blood. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Miller whispered. "He's not just killing them, Harding. He's preserving them." Harding felt a cold wave of nausea. The meticulousness sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't the work of a madman. This was the work of a macabre artist. As they moved deeper into the butcher shop, the air grew heavy with the scent of decay and something else. Something ancient and unholy that sent a primal fear crawling up Harding's spine. The walls seemed to close in on them, the silence pressing down with the weight of 1,000 unspoken sins. They found themselves in a narrow corridor, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with jars filled with preserved organs, each one meticulously labeled with a date and a name. The air hung thick with the cloying scent of formaldehyde, a sickly sweet perfume that spoke of death and decay. Harding, his stomach churning, recognized the names scrawled on the jars. They were the missing, the forgotten, the victims whose faces had stared out at him from countless missing person posters, their eyes pleading for a justice that had eluded them in life. "He's keeping score," Miller whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of his own heart. Each jar, each specimen, a trophy in his twisted game. Harding, his gaze fixed on a jar containing a human heart, its ventricles still eerily plump, felt a cold dread grip his chest. He had seen the depths of human depravity, had stared evil in the face and emerged unbroken. But this was different. This wasn't just about murder or even madness. This was about something far more sinister, something that spoke of a darkness so profound it threatened to consume him whole. At the end of the corridor, they found a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred and scratched, as if clawed at from the inside. A single word, scrawled in what appeared to be dried blood, adorned the door Croft. Harding, his hand trembling slightly, reached for the doorknob, its cold metal sending a jolt of fear through his arm. He could feel the weight of Miller's gaze on his back, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever horrors awaited them on the other side. He had come too far to turn back now. He had to face Croft, had to confront the monster that haunted his city and his dreams. This was no longer just about catching a killer. This was personal. The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in an eerie, flickering candlelight. The air, thick with the scent of decay, sent a wave of nausea crashing over Harding. He reached for his hip flask, seeking the familiar burn of whiskey. The room, dimly lit by flickering candles, was a sanctuary of the macabre. Mannequins stood draped in what Harding could only describe as suits of human skin. Each stitch spoke of a chilling intimacy, a grotesque craftsmanship. "What in the hell?" Miller whispered. He crossed himself, the gesture out of place in the unholy tableau. Harding felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The sheer depravity of the scene sent a shiver down his spine. This was the work of an artist obsessed, a macabre visionary. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of some viscous fluid. Harding approached the table cautiously, his hand hovering over his revolver. The smell, a mix of rotting flesh and something sweet, made his eyes water. The table was littered with surgical instruments and strips of drying human skin. A blood-soaked cloth concealed an object in the center. He reached out, trembling, and peeled back the cloth. Beneath lay a flayed human torso, organs exposed. The smell made Harding's stomach churn. The torso emitted a putrid odor like overripe fruit. It was the smell of death and something ancient. "What is that smell?" Miller whispered. He covered his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. Harding fought the urge to vomit. He had smelled death before, but this was different. This was something else entirely. Harding, his gaze fixed on the macabre tableau before him, felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen the depths of human depravity, had stared evil in the face and emerged unbroken. But this was different. This wasn't just about murder or even madness. This was about something far more sinister. Something that spoke of a darkness so profound it threatened to consume him whole. He turned away from the table, his gaze sweeping across the room, searching for some clue, some answer to the madness that surrounded him. And that's when he saw it. On the far wall, illuminated by the flickering candlelight, hung a tapestry. But this was no ordinary tapestry woven from fine silks and threads of gold. This tapestry was a grotesque mosaic of human skin, stitched together with a meticulousness that bordered on insanity. Faces, contorted in expressions of agony and ecstasy, stared out at him from the wall, their eyes seemingly following his every move. Limbs twisted and contorted in unnatural positions formed a macabre framework for the tapestry, their flesh stitched together with what appeared to be human hair. Harding, his breath catching in his throat, took a step closer, mesmerized by the sheer horror of it all. The tapestry, a testament to Croft's madness, pulsed with a life of its own, the stitched-together flesh seeming to breathe, to undulate in the flickering candlelight. It was as if the very souls of Croft's victims were trapped within the tapestry, their agony and despair woven into its very fabric. And as Harding stared at the grotesque masterpiece, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking into the abyss, into the very heart of darkness itself. "He's not just collecting skin, is he?" Miller whispered, his voice hoarse with a mixture of fear and revulsion. "He's becoming them." Harding, his gaze still fixed on the tapestry, nodded slowly. He had suspected as much, but seeing it confirmed, laid bare in all its gruesome glory, sent a shiver down his spine that he couldn't shake. Croft wasn't content with simply taking lives. He needed to consume them, to absorb their essence, to become something more than human. And as he stared at the tapestry, he noticed something else, something that sent a fresh wave of horror crashing over him. In the center of the tapestry, amidst the stitched-together flesh and contorted limbs, was a mirror, and in the reflection of that mirror, he saw him, Elias Croft. But this wasn't the Croft from the mugshots, the man with the vacant eyes and the haunted stare. This Croft was different. His face, once ordinary, was now a mask of stitched-together skin, the features pulled taut, giving him a grotesque, almost youthful appearance. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, now burned with an unholy fire, a mixture of madness and something else, something ancient and evil. Croft, his lips curled into a chilling smile, raised his hand, his fingers tracing the outline of the mask that covered his face. And as he did, Harding saw it. The flicker of recognition in those eyes, the glint of madness that mirrored his own. Croft whispered, "The flesh is weak, it decays, it withers, it betrays us in the end, but the skin is a vessel." Harding, gripping his revolver, growled, "You're insane." Croft laughed. Insanity is a relative term, detective. Join me and we can become gods. Harding felt a surge of adrenaline, the room now a cage. You're no god, Croft. You're a butcher, Harding spat. Croft's smile widened. The world is a place of infinite possibility, of endless transformation. Step aside, Miller, Harding growled, aiming at Croft. This ends now, Croft, Harding snarled. Croft lunged. Harding fired, but Croft twisted, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Harding crashed into the wall, struggling to his feet. Croft, unfazed, licked the blood from his claws. The flesh is weak, ephemeral. But the skin, detective, the skin remembers, Croft whispered. Harding pushed himself to his feet, revolver in hand. You're delusional, Croft. This isn't rebirth, it's desecration, Harding snarled. Croft lunged. Harding sidestepped, firing a shot that hit Croft's leg. It's over, Croft, Harding growled. You will never understand, Croft rasped. I am the future. Harding raised his revolver. It ends now, Croft, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed, the stench of gunpowder mingling with decay. Harding stood frozen, Croft's body slumped against the wall. Miller approached cautiously, his gaze darting between Harding and Croft. It's over, Miller whispered. Harding didn't answer, glancing at the tapestry of human skin. He turned away, his gaze falling upon a small, ornate mirror. Harding stared at his reflection, barely recognizing himself. He had caught Croft, but at what cost? Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. Let's get out of this place. As they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of Croft's macabre lair, each step taking them closer to the blessed normalcy of the outside world, a question lingered in the air between them, unspoken but ever present. What had driven Elias Croft to such depths of depravity? What dark desires, what twisted ambitions had fueled his gruesome pursuit of immortality, his macabre obsession with the human form? They had found answers of a sort within those blood-stained walls. They had seen the evidence of Croft's madness, the meticulous records of his victims, the grotesque trophies he had collected, the chilling testament to his twisted artistry. But the why, the root of his evil, remained elusive, a chilling enigma that lingered long after the echoes of the gunshot had faded into the night. Was Croft a product of his environment, a broken soul twisted by the violence and corruption that festered in the underbelly of the city? Or was there something more, something inherently dark and malignant lurking beneath the surface of his humanity, something that no amount of psychoanalysis or forensic investigation could ever truly explain? Harding didn't have the answers. Perhaps he realized with a chilling certainty there were no answers to be found. Some questions, some mysteries, were best left buried in the darkness from whence they came. As they emerged from the butcher shop, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, a fragile, fleeting beauty that stood in stark contrast to the horrors they had just witnessed. The air, though still carrying the faintest hint of decay, smelled clean, alive, a welcome reminder of the world beyond the confines of Croft's madness. Harding took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air, trying to cleanse himself of the stench of death, the lingering sense of unease that clung to him like a shroud. He knew that the memories of that night, the images of Croft's macabre handiwork, the chilling echo of his final words, would stay with him, haunting his dreams, whispering their secrets in the shadows of his mind. He had crossed a line tonight, had looked into the abyss and felt its icy grip on his soul. He had emerged victorious, but forever changed. As they walked away from the butcher shop, their footsteps echoing on the empty street, Harding couldn't shake the feeling that Elias Croft, though dead, was not gone. His presence lingered in the air, a chilling reminder that some evils, some obsessions, transcended the boundaries of life and death. The city would heal, would rebuild, would try to forget the horrors that had unfolded within its midst. But the legacy of the skin collector, the chilling testament to the darkness that lurked within the human heart, would remain. A cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, a chilling reminder that some monsters, even in death, refuse to be silenced.